Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you're located. I am Asaf Ramarowski, the Executive Director of ASMIA, and it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this really unique webinar session that we have planned for this afternoon with Peter Theroux and Michelle Ajami to talk about Fuad's autobiography. We have the privilege and really an opportunity to this new memoir that has been in the works for quite some time, that Michelle was intimately involved in, talking about the aspects. Those of you who knew Fuad knew there were many angles to Fuad, and this book really brings it all together in a variety of ways. Peter is a translator and author who spent a variety of years in the region as an observer, as a participant in a lot of these areas, and has the connection to Fuad is really through his wonderful translation over the years that he's been involved with Fuad, and brings a unique perspective to Fuad's work, Fuad's observations, and really we're looking forward to both of them sharing really what is the product, the rich product of bringing all of this together. The format, it will be as such. I will turn it over shortly to Michelle. She will introduce Peter. Peter will talk for about a half hour or so. Then we'll go into a Q&A. We will do our best to get to all the questions this afternoon. And if we don't, please email us afterwards. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, and we'll take it from there. So really, thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Michelle and Peter. And Michelle, the virtual floor is yours.
Okay. Well, I want to start by thanking you, Asaf and Asmia. This is the second event that you have hosted that shows your incredibly warm fidelity to Fuad's legacy. And this one in particular focusing on the man and the memoir. And then I want to introduce Peter. Peter, I haven't known Peter for very long, but I feel like I've known him for a lifetime. I knew him most of all through the praise that Fuad heaped on his incredibly talented translations of Arabic fiction, and his deep knowledge of not just the language, which is unfathomable, has no bottom, and the culture. And so I think he was uniquely suited to write the forward to the memoir, as he could navigate that space between the political and the cultural worlds that Fuad inhabited. So I am very, very grateful to you both. And I also wanted to make clear that I know there's a lot of people listening today who knew another side of Fuad that I didn't know. There were many sides to him, and I hope that just as I will contribute what insights I have, I hope others will as well, because I know there are people out there who have a depth of knowledge about him that I don't. So I'm going to turn this over to Peter so that he can get started, and looking forward to what he has to say, which is always sometimes surprising and sometimes insightful and always interesting. So, Peter, I give you the floor.
It's such a pleasure to be here and to talk about our wonderful friend Fuad. And I can't wait actually to stop talking and enjoy the discussion with you, Michelle, and with the other listeners, and learn about other perspectives on Fuad. So I'm here principally, I think, because I wrote the foreword to this book at Michelle's request, and thanks to Tony Badran. And of course, that was a huge honor. And so I would like to talk just a little bit about the Fuad that I knew, which of course evolved. It went from level to level to this very happy altitude where I was able to publish my comments about his this one incredibly wonderful and unique memoir that he wrote when magic failed. Of course, I first knew Fuad as I was a nothing, 20-year-old like everybody else. I was reading his books and his articles and couldn't believe his skill with the language, his fearless perspectives, his ability to address the cultural, the political, the literary, and religious aspects of Lebanon, the Middle East, and the world. He had a very, very canny understanding of the world, especially as we see now with what's happening, the role that hard men play, and he was never fooled by spin, by wishful thinking, and his literary depth, informed his understanding of politics, and yet it was a revelation to me. It took me until about last year when I first read this manuscript to see exactly what gave him these amazing insights. And you, Michelle, and I have talked about how the indescribable hardship of the very hard world he grew up in, that extreme poverty of southern Lebanon, and the role that some of the survivors played. And they were largely women. Some of them didn't survive at all, and I would like to address that. But I was fortunate enough to go from being an admirer, a fan of Fuad's, to someone who got to know him, and that was through the great coincidence. We both wrote books about the late Sayyid Musa Sadr, the Iranian-born, more or less, envoy to Lebanon, because the Shah and the Shah's government always had an eye on the Shia of Lebanon, who, as we know, if the Shia of Lebanon are the Shia of Najaf and Baghdad as well, and of Qom and Tehran. I came to know Sadr's oldest son, Sadruddin, who lives in Tehran and is married to an Iranian, and Hezbollah has made Lebanon very inhospitable to the Sadr family. And then I got to know Fuad as a person. I was just incredibly fortunate to live in New York when he and Ahmed al-Husseini, another mutual friend of many of us, would get together and have cocktails and cook dinner, and never running out of things to talk about. I mean, that would be an understatement. And then, oddly enough, I did some years in government, which I've now separated from. But there was one of these spectacular coincidences when Fuad and another member of the Council on Foreign Relations were sent to Iraq by the Bush-Cheney administration because they wanted some ground truth from trusted people. And so Fuad and his colleague were sent to Baghdad, empowered to speak to the U.S. ambassador, the commanding general, the chief intelligence person in the country, and the prime minister, who I think then was Ibrahim al-Jafari. And the top intelligence person was too busy to talk to them. And so he sent me, and in a room in one of Saddam's palaces, which was then part of the U.S. embassy temporarily, there was this encounter where a door opened, and I walked in and I said, "Fuad?" And he stared at me. I had a pistol on my belt because you had to be armed at all times. And he said, "Peter?" And so instead of talking about the state of Iraq, we spent about a little while explaining what on earth both of us were doing there. That was a really funny coincidence. But to the book, I would like to say a couple of things. We might all know different Fuads or different angles of Fuad, as Michelle mentioned. But if anyone disagrees with me, they can tell me. But I think we all knew very much the same Fuad in terms of his personality, the voice of this book, which is so gentle, which is so fair. And when you consider the violence, the poverty, the absolutely medieval poverty that he grew up in, he mentions more than once children were playing with the bones of dead animals. It was tribal. It was tough. And yet there is not one word of bitterness in this book. There is no spin. There is no polemic. There is no anger. He approaches everything with great empathy. He's writing about his grandfather, who immigrated from Tabriz in Iran. His mother, twice divorced, illiterate, but brilliant, creative, loving, and unendingly courageous and dedicated to her sons, and to her family overall. The book is very much a portrait of Fuad, and it is again. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I've never, and I spent a lot of years studying Musa Sadr and the Shia of southern Lebanon as well as of the Bekaa Valley. I've never seen a first-hand account that touches this. Its documentary value is extremely great, and as we know, and if you don't know, you'll learn in the book. Thanks to to Ahmed Jazar Pasha in the Ottoman period, who was the wali of who sat in Akko in Acre now in northern Israel in the Western Galilee. The documentary history and literature of Jabal Amel of southern Lebanon was destroyed. He destroyed it, and so there again, gaps would be an understatement. We have very, very little in the way of documentary history, even in the modern age. We're talking about muddy roads and a Model T Ford taking people from Arnoun to Annabatieh. Widespread illiteracy, criminality. It's just, again, I should stop saying indescribable because he describes it very, very, very beautifully. Couple of points specific to the story he tells. And I'm very eager to hear from Michelle and others who know the documentary history of this book, how the book came together. There is almost this overture of the book. There is a preface which tells the story of an honor killing. And it is absolutely gripping. It's fairly horrifying. It's about a young woman named Dalal who has a love life, as everyone has, either openly in marriage or clandestinely in Beirut or in the various towns and cities of the South. But she is careless. And she's warned that she is disgracing the family. She's in trouble. Get married. You can do this after you're married, but you have to know how to do it the way you're doing it. Everybody sees it. And people are looking at us very funny. And long story short, she is murdered. She is murdered by a family member, in fact, her mother. This comes to Fuad via his own mother, who is making repeated pilgrimages to the shrine of Sayyidah Zainab in Damascus. And on one of these trips, the mother who committed this killing shares with Bahija, with Fuad's mom, what she did and why she did it. Now, the reason, apart from being a very sad and tragic story, which is told with enormous empathy and color and great understanding, and again with no anger, with no blame, he sees it as he sees so many things through his mother's eyes. But it is, although it's a 5 or 6 page preface to this wonderful book, it is an encyclopedia of the hypocrisy, shame, tribal tradition of everything relating to honor and shame and society that I think persuaded Fuad from an early age he was going to leave Lebanon. Everyone left Lebanon going back and forth to Saudi Arabia, to West Africa to make their fortune, to come back, to marry, to impress people with their success. If they didn't have success, they didn't dare show their faces back there. Fuad is entirely transparent about how, toward the end of the book especially, about he had to get out. But he uses this phrase, the theater that was Lebanese honor. Again, there is no pretension, there is no hypocrisy, and there is no patience for either one. This is what made Fuad such an incredibly astute observer and analyst of Lebanon, of Syria, of the Iraqi, Iranian, Saudi, etc. Worlds, political worlds. Back to the story of poor Dalal. She is beaten, she is threatened, and she is told, you can get away with this. And her response, not verbatim, but it's told in the book. She knows her father is cheating on her mother. She knows her mother is cheating on her father. Her father is boastful about who he's seduced the loveliest girl in town, but you have to know how to cheat. You have to know how to lie. If you break that rule, you end up dead. And so it's a truly, truly terrible story. The mother of Dalal, who kills the girl, is herself illiterate. She had suffered in Ghana, West Africa, with her husband, who wasn't totally successful there. The coroner, of course, who knows a shooting or strangling when he sees one, is bribed to say that it was a suicide. There's even animal cruelty. They bribe him with an elephant tusk, with a huge severed elephant tusk that he proudly displays in his coroner's office. It's an absolutely terrible terrible story. There is a point or two of connection again to Fuad's mother, to his incredibly admirable mother. She had I mentioned, and we know that she was divorced twice. She married a Sayyid from Jimshit. Marriage did not go well. It did produce a couple of children without disgrace and with her head held high. She had ended the marriage. She was an abused wife. She went back to Khiam. She would remarry. She would be divorced again by Fuad's dad, Ali. In the context of telling that story, Fuad mentions, in terms of his mother's intolerance of her treatment by her first husband and by her in-laws in Jimshit, a town that I myself have visited. It probably wasn't as poor when I saw it as it was when in the period that the book describes. But he says, submission was not something my mother was very good at. And we see that repeatedly. We see that also repeatedly as a lesson that he absorbed. And then with this point, maybe I'll stop talking and would love to hear other people talk. So Fuad resolved at an early age. He saw that someone like him, someone who was raised by the woman who raised him, wasn't a very good fit for southern Lebanon or even for Beirut as he saw it. And he saw it in the 50s. He saw the Camille Chamoun years. He saw it 58 after the coup in Iraq when the Marines landed and so on. But there were two American influences on him from an early age, beyond his learning English in the school where I think he says beatings and Arabic grammar were the two main features of that school. He learned English in school, but two things happened. He started to go to the movies, and he sounds like he was repeatedly a repeated viewer of High Noon with Gary Cooper. And if you know that movie, he loves even the song. He talks about the song. He talks about picking up phrases like "okay" and "see you later" that he became addicted to repeating. The heroism, the idea of being a loner, the courage, everything he sees in Grace Kelly and Gary Cooper, they resonate with him.'s seen these before. He's seen these in his mom, and then he went to an American school. He names, God bless him, he names a couple of his teachers, these young American men, who he said completely shattered this tradition of rote learning as young Arab students learn, as they experience. They show movies, they play a Harry Belafonte record in class, and he hears in an old American folk song, John Henry. He hears about John Henry was a man. And so at these very impressionable ages, he sees and hears these terrible stories. And whether it's the honor killing, whether it's his immediate family, the number of extended families he has, thanks to the circumstances of both of his parents, and the movies he reads, the books he reads. He's an early and very ardent lover of literature and poetry. We see this personality, this character forming, and one of the last straws, I think, is in that American school. He experienced independence, and he says there was no bullying. There was no bullying, but there was great innovation, and he and so he left, and of course he did go back, but I love the vignette. I think it's set in 1974. He is now Fuad Ajami. He's now Professor Ajami, and he is going to a conference in India, and his plane transits Beirut. Back in those old days, he probably undoubtedly had a paper ticket from whatever U.S. airport to New Delhi, and he wasn't specifically aware that there was either a transit stop or a refueling stop in Beirut. And he has his brevity and his ability to evoke are amazing. Again, the sort of overture, the preface of the book tells 1,001 Nights in 5 or 6 pages. He gives a paragraph to sitting in Beirut airport, and he can't leave fast enough. The idea that he didn't expect to be in Lebanon, now he's in Beirut, he's looking at those same mountains he used to look at, and he is very relieved to get on the plane, and arriving in India is a joy to him. He doesn't disguise these feelings, and he's very eloquent at describing them. Again, we all know different aspects of this amazing man, this very, very great man. But this book gives us his childhood, and it gives us a slice of history as only he can tell it. And unfortunately for him, fortunately for us, his readers, he did not have an easy early life. But that life was experienced by someone who would become a very, very great writer, essayist, and commentator. And so we have this very unique piece of literature that I love so much, and was so privileged to have a role in its production as a book. And so thank you for that time. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Asaf. Thank you all.
Peter brought up so many really of the most powerful themes and points in this, and I don't even know where to begin. But I'm going to start with that idea of a loner, because I think, from the from the moment I met Fuad, I remember distinctly in this apartment that I'm now in. When I first came here, there was nothing here. In fact, people would come and deliver food and ask if we were moving out, because there was absolutely nothing but other than books. There were just books everywhere. But there was one Japanese print of a fisherman alone on a boat, carrying his boat down the river, pulling his boat down the river. And Fuad, I remember so distinctly him telling me, I have that because that's me. And I think that was always the one, maybe the thing about him that really, really resonated in me most of all, the courage that he had to stand alone. I remember him once telling me, I feel like a tightrope walker without a safety net. And I really felt that much of his life was lived that way. But he chose that. He very much chose that. When he really burst on the scene here, there were attempts to get him in line with the Saidian way of thinking, and not just the Saidian way, but with Said himself. And I remember him saying, he's not my leader. He's not, I don't answer to him. He was warned, and he absolutely refused. He lived his life that way, without really any constituency to fall back on. He was his own person. I love too, much later in life, when he gave a talk in Doha during the Iraq War, and I only saw clips of this on YouTube, I think. he began by saying that the Iraq War was a noble war, and the audience burst into hoots and cries. And if they had shoes, I'm sure they would have thrown if they were they would have thrown shoes if they could have. Um, they all had shoes, but um, and as soon as it quieted down, he said, "Let me repeat, it was a noble war." And I thought, this is him in essence. This is the essence of him. And I think, you know, that American school was so fundamental. And I think that this is the root of his love for this country. And it resonates, I'm sure, with Lebanese today, with people from that part of the world today. The fact that he did go from that rote learning, which was instilled through the stick, through beatings, hands, and whatever you have, and then he went to the classroom of David Miller, right, who he called Daoud Khan, David Miller, who talked about driving his jalopy from California to New York, you know, and the freedom that this country presented to him, not just physical freedom and space, but the intellectual freedom, the emotional freedom, the spiritual freedom, everything, the freedom to think, right? And he was encouraged to think. And that left its mark. And I think it is the source, the real root of his devotion and his love for this country. Uh, I think that probably goes to the root of everything. And what else? The movies are key to that too. The westerns he loved. I mean, every Saturday was was Turner Movie Classics, and it was always westerns in this house. So yeah, and I think and the other thing you mentioned too, he was very it was very easy for him to see the world in terms of evil. I mean, he had no problem using that word, understanding what it meant, and applying it where it needed to be applied, to the Assads of the world, to the Saddams of the world, to the Gaddafis of the world. You know, when this sounds harsh, but I don't mind saying it, because I think it's quite true. When Gaddafi was killed in that very grisly way, Fuad's response was, "It's too bad he could only be killed once." And it wasn't because Fuad was a cruel man himself. He had enormous wells of sympathy for all sides. I mean, I watched him through so many different crises over 30 years, always finding his way to the underdog. Always. That was immediately the side he took. And even in the last great passion of his years, the Syrian rebellion, which really moved him more than I had ever seen him moved by anything. If you read his book, The Syrian Rebellion, I think what is so stunning is that after making the case so ironclad case for the Syrian Rebellion, at the very, very end, he turns to this incredibly heartbreaking scene of an Alawi girl being sold by her father into servitude in order for the family to survive. And it just flips the whole thing on its head. And you suddenly see everyone as victims. You suddenly see everyone as a victim. And this is really the way he understood the world. And his equanimity is, I can tell you any number of times when I was raging about something, and he had this deep well of equanimity to see far more sides than I could see. But his sympathy was always with the underdog, whether it was the Bosnians, whether it was the Kurds, whether it was the Armenians, whether it was the Shia, whether it was the Sunnis in Syria. Always with the underdog. And this comes from his this is right straight out of High Noon, right? Straight out of High Noon, or or Shane. But I have to say Audie Murphy was was one of his favorites as well, for all kinds of reasons. But yeah, Peter, you hit on some really key parts of who he was, and I'd love to hear from some of the people out there, because they, as I said, I know there are those listening who saw sides of him that would illuminate a lot of those corners as well.
I see a lot of people, former students as well as colleagues of Fuad in the audience, and so we are welcoming, comments and questions, as we're talking about the book itself. And so please either raise your hand or write your question in, and we'll definitely unmute you to do that. I think to start us off, I know Alex, you had a question to start us off, so why don't you take the first one?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks very much for a fascinating and heartfelt presentation from both of you, and I'm anxious now to read the book. I have a question, though. I guess it's for both, but maybe it's more properly directed to Peter, from the point of view as a translator. And one of the striking things about Fuad Ajami and a select handful of other Middle Eastern scholars of the 20th century is their command of English. And I point to Eli Kaduri and Albert Hourani, and even Edward Said, all of whom came to English as a second or even a third language. And here we can point back to the greatness of somebody like Conrad, for whom English was obviously a second language, but whose use in terms of created an element of freedom that they could not find in their original languages. Isaiah Berlin is another notable example. And I was wondering whether there is something, again, from the point of view of the translator, something unique about this movement from Arabic to English that invites directness or indirectness or lack of equivocation or the opposite.
My only insight there would be that among people who've come to English as a second or third language and written in it, and you mentioned Hourani, Said. I don't think Said's Arabic was terribly deep, but that's maybe a conversation for another time. Among writers who have made English their own language and become first-rate, brilliant, eloquent authors, I would put Fuad Ajami not only in the category of Conrad, of Joseph Conrad, but also of Vladimir Nabokov, because Fuad's eloquence, his skill with English is borders on the miraculous, and there are two sides of one coin there. Conrad and Nabokov and the others were not the deep political analysts that Fuad was. He married a tremendous facility with English, a very rich language like Arabic, with, as Michelle said, the person he was. He couldn't be anyone but what he was. And you combine the harsh upbringing, the terrible realities he experienced, someone like that is not going to be anyone's fool. He will never fall for spin or propaganda or lobbying. And of course, he will never be a lobbyist or a propagandist or a spin doctor. So you marry that hard life that made him an extreme realist and extremely empathetic, as Michelle pointed out, with the language skill, and we have Fuad there. As an Arabic translator, as a translator of Arabic into English, for literary works, I don't have anything to offer there, except to say I've never seen anyone so adept in both languages. Never, not anyone whose name has come up.
I want to say that I think one of the most powerful images I have of the first few images I have of Fuad was walking by his office at SAIS and seeing him writing, and all I could hear was, and this is how he wrote. From that point on, every time he sat where I'm sitting now or in the kitchen, every time he wrote orally. He wrote orally. He could not write a word. Right up to the very last essay he wrote 2 weeks before he died, I had to read it aloud to him. Every single sentence he wrote or fed to me, I read back, because he had to hear it in his ear. He had to hear the music of it. And I believe it goes back to his poetry, to the Arabic poetry he wrote as a young boy. And I don't know, I know a fraction of what you know about Arabic, Peter. Your depth of knowledge is so great. And Fuad loved the language. He said it is the richest language in the world, in terms of the sound of it, the beauty of it, the amount of options you have for words to find the perfect sound. And I think this carried over into his English. I think he was always looking for how did the words sound, not just what they meant. But then he said to me also, he said, I prefer to write in English because it's so precise. Because I can say exactly what I want to say. And Arabic was circular. and I think with those two, the sound mattering to him, the cadence, the music of it, and then the precision of the language. But I agree with you. And speaking of Conrad, everyone who knows Fuad knows that he absolutely adored Conrad. He read everything that Conrad wrote and could recite lines from Conrad. In fact, that wonderful line from, I think it's Under Western Eyes, it would take too long to explain the intimate alliance of contradictions that makes love itself wear at times the desperate face of betrayal. How many times did I hear that? And he knew that is what he, just as Conrad was vilified by some of his fellow Poles, Fuad said this as an explanation of his politics at times, that love itself wears at times the desperate shape of betrayal. But he adored Conrad, and I think he imbibed Conrad. So I think, on all of those counts, you're exactly right, Peter.
Martin Kramer has a question.
Okay, thank you. These were both really beautiful, beautiful presentations about Fuad. I'm in the midst of the book, and I think it'll be a revelation to anyone who knew Fuad in America, because Fuad was the ultimate urbanite. We all knew he came from a village. Peter used the word medieval. We didn't know just the extent of the distance that he really crossed. And when you talk to Fuad, it was, Princeton was too quiet, Washington was too provincial, Cambridge was just a village. He really was a quintessential New Yorker. He was the city Shiite. So this book is a huge revelation. He once visited me in Israel, and I took him up the hill to a nearby moshav, which is a kind of a communal village, and his eyes lit up. He said, "This reminds me of my home village. The dogs lazing in the street, the smells of the fauna, and the flora and the sights of the fauna." But he really was a city person, and as much as he was an American, I suppose he was a New Yorker. And I wonder, Michelle, if you could say something about his relationship to the city, his affection for the city, because in later years, the only time I ever saw him was in the city.
Well, I think you got it just right, Martin. You really did. It's nice to hear your voice. You got it exactly right. He was so totally an urbanite. He insisted on living in a place where he could go downstairs and get coffee, even though I always made coffee. Unless I wasn't there, he had to go down and get coffee. And the few times that I could drag him to Maine for any length of time, after about 2 weeks, he said, "I need my books. I have to get back to my books. I have to," as if they were his family. But it was definitely the city. And you're right. He couldn't abide living in the small town of Princeton or Washington. And he didn't really see Washington change as much as it changed, but he was definitely a man of New York in the same way that he was of Beirut. And yet, Arnoun was so formative. It was so powerfully formative, you know, when he died. And I don't mean to bring up his death so much, but that was the one thing he wanted on his gravestone, was the word Arnoun. That was the only request he had, that it be there. Arnoun was a powerful component in his psyche, and I think maybe more for the people, but also for what sounds to me like the most dramatic of geographies. Sounded just formidable, and the photographs that I've seen are just really awe-inspiring. And I think even for him, it must have had an impact. He pretended to be indifferent to nature, but I don't think he was. But people are what interested him most of all, people. And of course, New York is full of people. You know, we would take our two beloved nephews to Italy, and if they were with me, if I was there, there were museums to see. But if it was Fouad, it was the cafes and the people to see. That was it. There was nothing else. Just people. People were everything to him. And I think that is the essence of who he was. You know, whether it was the characters from Egyptian literature or the Egyptians themselves. My goodness, he was so in love with Egypt for so many years. But it was, and even the travels that you know, sometimes were arduous, spending weeks and weeks at a time in a place like Iraq. The people were everything to him, and I think that's why New York was so important as well. Not because he spent his time so much socializing, but because the life here was so interesting and curious, and sometimes awful as well, you know. But it was people that he cared about. People, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I know we have another question here. I see from Iyad.
I don't know if it's so much of a question. I love Dr. Ajami. I did a radio show about 9/11 in the Arab world, and Dr. Ajami honored me by being my first guest, and I was, you know, I'm a nobody, and he was so kind, so generous to me. But I just sort of wanted to share an Arab's, maybe I don't know, insider perspective or something. But uh, I'm sure people know that a lot of these, I'd say, confessions by Dr. Ajami about, you know, eagerness. You told that story, Mr. Theroux, about, you know, being in the airport in Beirut, and the eagerness to leave. Those are heretical thoughts for Arabs. You know, you just verboten. You shouldn't. You really can't harbor such thoughts. I also agree with Mrs. Ajami very much about the language. You know, again, it's sort of the reflects the indirectness and dishonesty of dealings among Arabs. You know, that and I think you also mentioned, Mr. Theroux, that, you know, the theater and the theater of interaction, sort of you know, it's a lot of, you know, there's routine. It's not direct speaking, not honest, not true speaking. That's just about. I just wanted to share those.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ahmad, for that insight. Yeah, he was very good to us nobodies. It's one of the reasons we love him. But yes, my brief comment is, yeah, the quote in the case of the murder of that young lady, Dalal, he said, the theater that was Lebanese honor. He wasn't fooled by it, but, you know, he didn't make these remarks with hatred or self-hatred, or there was no anger. It was just the truth, and that's all he knew how to do, was tell the truth, and so eloquently, and 20/20 vision, right?
Indeed. Michelle, you wanted to comment on that?
No, I think both have said some really beautiful insights. I totally agree with them in terms of what I absorbed from him. Absolutely.
I know that Cole Bunsel also has a question here.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Peter, for being here. This has been a lovely tribute. My only thing I find a bit regrettable about having this memoir, which I have not yet had the chance to peruse, is that we won't be able to have a sequel. And I would really love to have been able to read Fouad's remarks about his later transformation away from being an Arab nationalist, or a Nasserist, as he liked to say when he came to the United States. So I was wondering if there's anything in the memoir that would be a kind of a premonition of that coming disillusionment with Arab nationalism, and his later conviction in the inherent goodness of democracy and American power.
I think that comes out mostly in his experiences at the IC, at the International College, with his mentors there. As I said before, that America brought to not just him, but even to his aunts who were open to a modern world and to freedom and liberation. And I think that's really what America symbolized for him always. And I can't really imagine what he would make of where we are today, because he treasured that freedom so much, and believed deeply in America's ability to bring that to other places, just as he saw that it brought it to him as a young man, as a boy. It brought it to him. So I maybe that is the key, Cole. I'm not sure. I think if you want a sequel, you could take your notes from class and those wonderful quotes that you have, and patch together a piece of it. You know part of the sequel very well.
Hi, Cole. Nice to hear your voice. You get a little bit of a sense of this toward the end of the book, as Michelle points out, his encounters with his American teachers, but also his Lebanese teachers, who lean, one or two of them lean to the nationalist left and are a little bit sarcastic with him in class, because they see how Fouad is, his character is being formed, and what his tastes in movies and stuff are. And yeah, you do get inklings. You'll enjoy that part of the book.
I want to thank you both for really taking the time and for the for sharing all of this. I mean, it is heartfelt, it is genuine, and it is clearly Fouad all around, and the impact that he continues to have on all of us. I want to thank again Peter and Michelle and everybody who attended this afternoon to talk about this. And this is really, as I said to Michelle and Peter at the beginning, offline, this is a continuation of a conversation. There's so much to continue talking about. It's clearly, I think in many ways, the void that is missing Fouad's voice today, as far as, to your last point, Michelle, about, current events and where things are. So I think it's part of our message and our mission, at Asmiya here to continue and follow the legacy of both our founding fathers, Fouad and Bernard Lewis, and their voices all around. So I really, I thank you for sharing all of the personal connections and the memories, and the legacy that will continue.